Before Soma, Amnesia, and even Penumbra Overture, there was one little game that sprung the small development team, Frictional Games, into action. A demonstration piece called simply Penumbra. Penumbra, or better known as the Penumbra Tech Demo, has a lot of curious details about it, even for being a relatively short game not necessarily made for the general public. To that end, here are the top 10 facts about the Penumbra Tech Demo, made by Frictional Games. A lot of cut or incomplete content is left over in the game's demo files. One example of this is the presence of a reference to what was most likely a tunnel map, level 01_01_tunnel.dae. It's never seen in the actual game, and is only seen in the .hps script file for level 01_02_entrance. Due to a tunnel map never being seen in the final product, this leftover bit of code is all that remains of the map that was never implemented. Due to the prefix in the name, it's possible that this level was intended to be the very first level. Most people tend to refer to the protagonist scene in the introduction of the game, and who you play as, to be another version of Philip Buchanan, the protagonist scene in the more official Penumbra series. There are definitely similarities between physical appearance, backstory, attitude towards their environment, and methods of puzzle solving. However, despite this, the man you play as in the demo is never named, be it in the actual game, or even in the files. Similarly, the Roach is a fairly iconic enemy across the Penumbra series, despite only officially appearing in the Penumbra Tech Demo, and unofficially in a few HPL modifications. Yet, there's never actually any information presented in the game itself stating the Roach's name is the Roach. The only reference to this is, again, within the game's files. The textures and other data concerning this entity label it as Roach. Speaking of the Roach, in the game, there's something curious to note inside the room the first Roach comes bursting out of. If the player examines two of the walls closely, there are certain tiny spots where the interaction icon appears. The player can click on this spot, but except for an icon change, nothing happens, and no items used on these spots seem to do much of anything. These could have been areas where vents were to be placed, or they were for a completely different set of items for interaction. No one really knows to this day. If the texture and material files are removed for the hinged door seen in the game, the player can peer through the doorway to the inside of the room where breathing sounds are heard. The exterior would have the player believe it was a bathroom, yet all that's really seen inside is almost an exact duplicate of the room right next door, minus shelves, chairs, and a vent on the ceiling. This still very well could have been the room that the Hunter enemy was meant to appear in. Concerning the Hunter, it is possible to see what it would have looked like in the actual game without having to load up any fan-made mods. The original models and animations still exist in the game files if one looks for them, so with a select change of the coding and model directories, you can get a Hunter enemy to appear in-game in place of any of the static objects. It doesn't move, or attack, obviously, but it still makes for a close-up look, at this famed cut enemy. A few of the music tracks in the Penumbra Tech Demo are lifted right from Unbirth, a previous project of Thomas Gripp's, a game created using a different engine with the same general feel of Lovecraftian horror. Most iconically is the attack theme for when the roach is chasing the player. This theme is played in Unbirth when the player has to fight the even weirder looking enemies there with a firearm. This reuse of assets is a common trend among Frictional Games' earlier titles, and has carried over into more modern games of theirs. Another example of cut content in the tech demo is a texture map for a corpse that can be found in the files. It's actually fairly detailed, but it never makes an appearance in the game in the form of a model. It likely would have appeared in the room where the first roach comes from, in place of, or along with the bloodied coat the player sees there. Or it might have been seen in or near the entrance to level 2, towards the end of the game. The tech demo that most have come to know is actually not the first version to be released to the public. There is indeed an earlier build of this game, version 1.0. The main game in this version is largely unchanged. What's interesting to note, though, is that the main menu and some music was different for the initial build of this game. It's subtle enough in the main menu but the intro track has been completely changed in the newer version, giving a track more reminiscent of the main theme itself instead of what came before it.
Despite warnings from the fishermen, I started walking towards my destination. Now that I was close, I couldn't just stop and rest. As I was walking, a strange sensation went through my body. I wondered what was waiting for me out there. Half an hour later, I was caught in a fierce storm. Perhaps I should have listened to the fishermen. I struggled on blindly and thought I was about to die from exposure when I found some sheltering rocks.
There's also a lot more unused files, some of which were jokes put in by the developers as placeholders, and an additional directory, Temporary Models, which is the folder that the Hunter model can be seen in. Finally, in the game's English language file, an unused entry can be seen. It's labeled as Test 01, and the contents of the entry is actually an excerpt from The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, a novel by H.P. Lovecraft. From a private hospital for the insane near Providence, Rhode Island, there recently disappeared an exceedingly singular person. He bore the name of Charles Dexter Ward and was placed under restraint most reluctantly by the grieving father who had watched his aberration grow from a mere eccentricity to a dark mania involving both the possibility of murderous tendencies and a profound and peculiar change in the apparent contents of his mind. Doctors confessed themselves quite baffled by his case, since it presented oddities of a general physiological as well as psychological character. In the first place, the patient seemed oddly older than his 26 years would warrant. Mental disturbance, it is true, will age one rapidly, but the face of this young man had taken on a subtle cast which only the very aged normally acquire. In the second place, his organic processes shewed a certain queerness of proportion, which nothing in medical experience can parallel. Respiration and heart action had a baffling lack of symmetry. The voice was lost, so that no sounds above a whisper were possible. Digestion was incredibly prolonged and minimized, and neural reactions to standard stimuli bore no relation at all to anything heretofore recorded, either normal or pathological. The skin had a morbid chill and dryness, and the cellular structure of the tissue seemed exaggeratedly coarse and loosely knit. Even a large olive birthmark on the right hip had disappeared, whilst there had formed on the chest a very peculiar mole or blackish spot of which no trace existed before. In general, all physicians agree that in Ward, the processes of metabolism have become retarded to a degree beyond precedent. Yet another nod to how much Frictional Games were inspired by his works, and the general concept of Lovecraftian horror. And that about does it for this Top 10 Facts video. Thanks to all you horror fans for watching. If you enjoyed this kind of content and want to see more, please consider subscribing, and share this video with your friends through social media or even word of mouth. I am the Midnight Researcher, and I will see you all around.